Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully now you can see my screen, can you?
Yeah, I've got that, Mark. You need to go into full screen, I think.
Oh, you'll see the whole thing, do you? Okay, you got that now?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much, Peter, and thank you to the UKWA for hosting this series of webinars. We're really looking at the exciting things that are happening in the mainland China market as it relates to e-commerce and, of course, online shopping, internet retail, and the exciting things that are happening there, which is revolutionizing what's going on and representing a lot of opportunities for companies large and small, and in particular the focus of this discussion and the context of our mission for British businesses. We have a two-part webinar series. This first one today is focusing on the internet retailing side of it, so looking at the market as a whole and also specifically the opportunities for getting into the retail perspective. Our second webinar, which is on the 26th of July, will specifically look at the supply chain and logistics dimension of how to serve the online Chinese consumers in terms of the fulfillment that's needed from the online shopping aspects. So today I'm going to look at the topic in three parts. First of all, just set the scene with some background on what I christened the e-commerce frenzy, which is not unique to China, but certainly the way it's manifesting itself in China is somewhat different to the rest of the world. Secondly, look at some of the numbers in China itself. China on steroids is my subtitle, and these are just staggering numbers of what's happening with the online and e-commerce. And then thirdly, specifically to zero in on the internet retail aspect of it and look at the channels to market, what's happening there, and 4 different business models that British companies may want to consider in order to capitalize on these opportunities. And then, as Peter said, we'll have some time for a discussion at the end, and during the talk people can submit questions through the chat feature. Okay, so that's our menu for the next 40 minutes or so. So why should you care, I guess, is the first question. Well, this e-commerce frenzy that is taking off around the world in the China market is bigger and faster than anywhere else by a long margin. This first slide shows us that the projection for this year is $900 billion worth of online commerce happening in China. I would not be surprised if it hits $1 trillion compared to the forecast for the next largest markets, being the US, which is under 400, the US, UK over 100, and Japan at 100. So the activity that's happening online in China surpasses any other of the world's e-commerce markets, and most of these certainly in the center of the chart are fully developed commercial markets, whereas China is still developing. It manifests itself rather differently in China and other emerging and developing markets in Asia because of this insight on this slide here. So first of all, in the developed markets, which would be the UK, Europe, United States, Australia, we have established infrastructure around modern retail. We have established business-to-consumer shopping channels. Some of us will remember the catalog shopping where we flick through the pages and place the orders, and at the posted off the order form in the mail, and the order form said allow 4 weeks for delivery. Some of you will remember that. And to supplement that, we have established sophisticated logistics infrastructure for home delivery, supporting the catalog, the online, the television shopping, etc. And we've also progressed over a series of technological generations through to become the smartphone. So if we think about online shopping in a developed world environment, there's not really much we can do online that we could not drive to the town centre or drive to the shopping mall or drive to the out-of-town store and shop there. There's not much that we couldn't do online that we could not do it. So it's a convenience. It's exciting, it's interesting, it's growing, but it's a convenience factor. And I think in this world of the developed environment, it's stretching from a retail perspective on how to respond to these challenges. And of course, we've christened the omni-channel retail terminology. However, in the developing and emerging markets, as generally around Asia and specifically in China, the penetration of modern retail is very low. So traditional retail in most emerging markets is still more than 50% of the total retail activity. And there is no established business-to-consumer and consumer-to-consumer legacy channels. We have relatively unsophisticated and unrefined logistics ecosystem. So we're talking about a greenfield scenario. And in these rapidly emerging and developing markets, a lot of these online consumers are the younger generations. The entry point for them is straight into the smartphone. They haven't migrated from a desktop, maybe with a landline connection. They go straight into the smartphone with all its computing power, its small form factor, and its ubiquitous access to the internet. So in the developing world, this is a new channel, and it opens up as a new channel a whole new segment of new consumers. So this is about excitement. And because a lot of the modern retail is not there to be challenged by online, the challenges here are particularly around the logistics and supply chain aspects, because we don't have that legacy of sophisticated logistics ecosystems or established home delivery networks. And what this does is the power of the smartphone together with the Wi-Fi enables digital consumers, wherever they are and whoever they are in some of the most far-flung places, to be able to shop online. This is the transformative power of the smartphone coupled with the Wi-Fi. So those people can go shopping online and imagine themselves to be in Macy's or Harrods or Sogo. So these people on the left can shop as if they're online in the places on the right. And many of the people who are shopping online through the smartphone have never been to a department store. Many of them are hundreds of miles from a major city. Many of them would not know what a shopping mall looks like. But they do shop online, and of course with the promise that's offered by our online models of a rapid delivery and frequently free of charge delivery, they can have their products delivered to wherever they are. This is a portfolio of pictures of people in rural Chinese provinces putting on display outside their house products that they have bought online through e-commerce. So you can see the sort of locations where they are and some of the sort of products that they have purchased and are very proudly displaying here. And of course, most of these deliveries would have been within 24 or 48 hours, and the vast majority would be free of charge. We use the word free of charge cautiously because, of course, it might be free of charge delivery, but that delivery is not free of cost. Somebody is paying for it. So in the emerging markets, we have this explosion of e-commerce, much more exponential growth than we have in the developed markets, for the reasons that it is new. It opens up new consumers to shop through new channels. This is from eMarketer's April forecast of this year. And you can see how Asia is already more than half of the global e-commerce sales in terms of US dollar revenue, and China is a substantial proportion of the Asia, such that China's now around 44% of the total projected sales of $2 trillion this year. As I said earlier, it would not surprise me to see China reach $1 trillion this year. If not this year, then it's definitely going to happen in 2017. It is already, you can see further down, it is already in China, e-commerce is almost 16% of retail sales this year, considerably higher than in the developed markets. And the projection is that by 2018, it'll be 2.5 times the global average of the e-commerce penetration of retail, and it'll be running at almost 29%. So that's the sort of backdrop for setting the scene of this e-commerce frenzy, the backdrop for getting into some more details specifically about what's happening in China. So the context for what's happening in China are some key government initiatives, particularly around driving to a wired economy, and they have a strategy called Internet Plus, involving a rapid rollout of 5G telecom technology. There's a number of figures on this slide. Here we can see in the left, we can see the rapid growth in online retail spending. This one projecting the $1 trillion around 2019-20. As I said earlier, it will happen earlier than that. The increase in online buyers here, the dramatic proportion of mobile as a proportion both of internet users and internet shoppers. We can see here the high proportion of mobile users. And as I said, this is largely because a lot of the new users are coming in straight with mobile. They're not migrating or progressing from desktop to laptop to smartphone. They're straight in at smartphone. The bottom left shows us the internet penetration rate. If we look at where we are now, we're somewhere around 50+% of internet penetration rate of the population. Now that means that there's more than 500 million consumers in China who are not yet on the internet. And then the online marketing, we can see how this is taking a pickup in the last 18 months to the proportion of online marketing campaigns through the digital network. This wired economy that will enable the Internet Plus is around getting large-scale 4G and 5G network in place. So by the end of this year, there will be 500 million 4G subscribers, and then by 2020, they will have rolled out the 5G network. So it's becoming a wired economy where an internet is a huge part of it. If we look at the top 10 e-commerce markets around the world, this shows us, this demonstrates, this is from JD.com by the way, that China is by far the market and also the fastest growing market. So this is why we should be interested. You can see here the other top 10 markets. There's a key set of numbers down the bottom. This bottom right demonstrates the prevalence of the mobile transactions. And if we go on to the next slide, you can feast your eyes here. And I think the key ones are bold in the center. So this is 2015 numbers. So these would have already have been surpassed. So 400 million online shoppers, 55% of the revenue is generated by mobile shoppers. And last year's revenue, we're talking about $672 billion US dollars of revenue, which generated almost 21 billion shipments of small form factor, in most cases, packages. How does that generate it? As I said, it's all about mobile, so the vast proportion of these transactions are happening on the mobile, on the move, and 3/4 of all e-commerce in China by 2020 will be via the mobile device. So mobile ready from an internet retail perspective is absolutely essential. There's a couple of charts from Statistica here which sort of reflect that we're on steroids, but there's a whole lot more to come. This first one is the projected e-commerce sales growth, B2C sales growth, in a selection of countries back in 2014. And you can see how far ahead China is in the projected growth, which is, I think we've already sort of understood and demonstrated that. If we map that onto the second chart from Statista, where it shows the average e-commerce spending per online shopper, this is a 2015 number, you can see how further down the chart China is, with the average spending being around 1/3 of what the average e-commerce shopper spends in the United States, and much less than half of what is spent in the UK. So if we extrapolate the growth rate projections in large percentage numbers, with the potential for the average Chinese e-commerce shopper to be spending at the UK or United States rates, then we have even more exponential growth. And what we're going to talk about in the third section is the methods and the channels for companies to capitalize on this opportunity. So this internet penetration, as I said earlier, there's still only half, even though the numbers are huge, only half of the Chinese consumers are online. So if we think that over a period of time, that trajectory will hit to the 80 or maybe even 90% penetration rate, we can see how big these numbers are going to get. And it's younger consumers that are driving this e-commerce demand. What we see at the top here is the distribution of China's online shoppers versus the lower half of the chart shows the age distribution of the overall population. And you can see the sweet spot is the 20 to 29, 30 to 39 in the distribution overall and online, but we can see how the teenagers are making up quite a large proportion of the online shopping, and hence the migration, natural migration to digital natives who are intuitive smartphone technology users. Many of you would have heard about the China Singles Day. It's been quite a phenomenon around the world. It started around a decade ago with students at Chongqing University treating themselves and creating a day just to give gifts to each other. Alibaba, which is by far the dominant player in internet overall in China, and certainly makes headlines around the world, has taken on this 11/11 Singles Day charge with a vengeance. And last year, in 24 hours, on the 11th of November 2015, just through the Alibaba platform, they generated over $14 billion worth of online commerce sales, which generated 468 million dispatches, some of which may still not have been delivered. And you can see the proportion of of mobile relative to total sales there is well over 2/3 of it. So this Singles Day, and we'll swing back to that at the end when we look a bit deeper into the Alibaba platform model. So it is a massive event. There's talks of $20 billion being transacted in November of this year in that 124-hour period. So in the internet retail world, if we're interested in capitalizing on this opportunity with hundreds of millions of Chinese online consumers wanting to purchase online, what's the framework that we might want to consider to go about doing that? Well, first of all, this is it's a huge opportunity, but it's not without its challenges. It is a massive market, as I've already demonstrated. It is hugely complex, as is everything and anything to do with the China economy, and it's dynamic in that there's a number of changes happening in terms of the market, in terms of the regulation, and in terms of the consumer behaviors. But it's there to be capitalized on. This gives you in the top right-hand corner the split between the online shopper analysis. So we've got the male gender, the male and female. We've got the age demographics. So 50% of the online shoppers are in the 20 to 29 age group. The education level is there. So high school, college and university, again, are the dominant sectors. And the monthly disposable income in renminbi is 1,000 to 3,000 per month, is 50% of the sector. We've already seen this bottom half in other charts of how this online shopping growth is expanding, and a significant proportion of mobile in terms of online shopping, and the significant proportion of retail sales that is taken up by online shopping. What are these people buying? Well, this is from Li & Feng's business research group, the Feng Business Intelligence Center, and this is the top 10 best-selling online categories that Chinese consumers are buying. I don't need to read them out for you. You can see for yourselves. This is the top 10 product categories that are being purchased online. And how are they paying for it? This is very interesting, how the domestic financial or online financial ecosystems have evolved to capitalize on this online shopping in an environment where a substantial proportion of the online shoppers wouldn't necessarily be credit card users. So these online payment systems coming from the electronic service providers we could see here are the Tenpay, the UnionPay, and the Alipay. It tends to be what's dominating the payment transactions, as opposed to a Visa, MasterCard, or Amex type environment that we might be used to in the developed markets. So that's how they're paying. That was what they're shopping. And who's buying where? Many of you will be familiar with this categorization that we use when talking about the Chinese cities. We talk about Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4. Generally, Tier 1 and 2 make up, depending on whose listing you use, anything between 80 and 100 cities, which are generally relatively large. The Tier 1 cities are Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen. And then what we're seeing now, this is from McKinsey in the second quarter of this year, is that we now have an online shopper base in the Tier 3 and 4 cities, smaller cities, although many of those with a million plus population. We have more shoppers there in terms of critical mass, and we have a faster growth. So what this is telling us is that away from the Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, and sometimes in the rural locations that we saw earlier on, we're gaining critical mass in terms of the number of shoppers who are going online, empowered through their smartphone and the Wi-Fi, and therefore generating more transactions in the Tier 3 and 4 cities and in some of the rural areas where we've got faster growth. That then has implications, of course, for the supply chain and logistics ecosystem, which is what we'll be covering in the second webinar. What's also interesting is that the rule of thumb number is about 20% now of online Chinese shoppers are purchasing online from overseas websites. So this is the terminology to describe this has been formed as cross-border. We can see here on the left-hand side, this is from the same McKinsey report, on the left-hand side, the tier city level, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the percentage of online shoppers in those cities who are buying online from vendors outside of China. And it's higher in the higher tier cities. The right-hand part of the chart, which correlates to the city level, is the products that they are buying most of in terms of their share of total spending. So, for example, in Tier 1 cities, 24% of online shoppers are buying from overseas. And of that total spending, 40% of it is being spent on healthcare products. We expect that healthcare products will continue to increase as a share of the cross-border e-commerce because of concerns, concerns about the quality and safety of healthcare products in the domestic market, so there's a perception of higher quality and higher safety of imported products. And secondly, an increasing proportion of economic prosperity and interest in spending on healthcare and general good living. We can see the proportion of luxury overseas retail is 50% of the share of total spending for second-tier city overseas shoppers. So this cross-border is a large proportion, and in fact I'll talk some more about how British companies are selling cross-border to these Chinese consumers through the two major platforms. The projection from Asia Briefing is that by 2020, there's an awful lot of things happening in 2020, but one of them is that there'll be over 200 million Chinese online shoppers who will be spending $245 billion worth of imported goods on an annual basis. So that's going to form an increasingly large proportion of the pie. It's about 20% of the shoppers, online shoppers at the moment, which would make it about 80 million online shoppers shopping cross-border, and that's going to grow to 200 million. So how do we get into this market? Well, it's a complex landscape. There are multiple different sectors and there are choices of channels and platforms. And most of the clients that I would be dealing with are interested in the B2C sector. And the one ringed in red here is the main B2C platforms that are available through which to sell your products. And we'll have a look at a couple of the major ones. Generally speaking, the B2C market is dominated by two players, two homegrown companies. One is the Tmall platform, which is part of the Alibaba group, and the second is the JD.com platform, which is now a NASDAQ-listed company, which is JD, and Tencent are a major shareholder there. So you can see how they dominate the market with around 80% plus of the total B2C market. You can see where the likes of Amazon fit into the mix. Now 1.2% of a $670 billion market is still a nice number to be having. One of the recent developments that will impact this chart is that Yihaodian, currently here with 1.5% of the market. Yihaodian was a standalone e-commerce site. Walmart took a stake in it. I think they acquired the whole thing eventually, and just in the last month, Walmart and JD.com have done a partnership arrangement whereby Yihaodian will become part of the JD.com platform. So these two dominate, Tmall and JD. Let's have a look at where they are on the global ranking. These are big companies. So Tmall is part of the Alibaba group and JD.com. This is a chart produced by JD.com showing the 2005 revenues in US dollars of the world's top 10 international internet companies. These are big companies, and they're major players on the global stage. Alibaba itself, the projection is that by the end of this year, their revenues as a group will be larger than Walmart. It is already in the region of the same, you can see some of the GDPs of some of our European neighbours here, and how that ranks up against the $463 billion of Alibaba's current revenue. They're behind this, the major thrust of the Singles Day. Everybody participates in Singles Day, but they are the major thrust behind it. They're the ones that have really exploited the opportunity and drive massive amount of volume. You can see here, this is the Singles Day from the 11th of November last year. You can see some of the key numbers here of how much was spent, how many merchants there were, how many brands. 16,000 of those were international brands. How much orders were generated in that 24-hour period. And then at the bottom left, and this is just Alibaba Group, okay, so this does not include the other online platforms. How many, the logistics network, which as I said, we'll go into more detail on the second webinar. So one of the recent developments is the O2O bifurcation, I guess. And what Alibaba specifically have done is a couple of things. First of all, they've struck up a partnership with Suning. Suning is one of the largest consumer electronics, white goods and consumer electronics retailers. We're probably talking a couple of thousand stores across China, and Alibaba and Suning have established a partnership whereby Suning's retail outlets provide a collection option for customers who have purchased through Alibaba's online platforms, and the reverse of that is that Suning products, or Suning's products, have access to be sold through the Alibaba platform. Alibaba also developed a partnership with Haier. Haier is a Chinese brand. It's the world's largest manufacturer of fridges and air conditioning units, often as a subcontractor to major international brands. Haier for a long time has had its own division, Haier Logistics, which has been distributing its products, fridges and air conditioners, all over China for in excess of a decade. So it has a full logistics network, including installation services to complement the delivery. So the installation of the air conditioning units and the fridges and other white goods. So Alibaba is forming, in addition to its logistics network that it put in place through its technology platform, it's forming collaborative ventures with other established players to extend its reach both into the retail arena effectively for click and collect offerings, and also into the mainstream distribution and logistics sector. At JD.com, sorry, by the way, I should have said that Alibaba is primarily a marketplace akin to an eBay type model. JD.com is also a marketplace, but the bigger part of its business is a online retailer as a merchant type model. So in this chart here on the right hand side is looking at the online direct sales model, or the merchant type model, where JD.com is more than half of the total market. And in the merchant model, whoever the platform is has much more control over the quality and the authenticity of the products. In JD.com's case, they also have their own logistics operation. The left-hand side is the overall market, where, of course, Alibaba is larger than JD.com. But JD.com's figures, and this is very interesting because these figures were at a presentation last week in London, where they have 169 million annual active customers generating 3.8 million orders on a daily basis. That was as of July 2016. In the third quarter last year, they had 132 million annual active customers. So their customer base has increased by 37 million customers in less than 12 months. Likewise, their revenue in the last set of figures was 64 billion. It's now running at 71.5 billion. And again, we reinforce this point of the proportion of transactions conducted via mobile. So that's Alibaba and JD.com. So if you were interested to capitalize on this opportunity, how would you go about setting up and selling into the market? Well, there are basically four models to be considered, and I'll go through each of these in turn. And number one is to sell directly from your website hosted outside of China. Well, this is pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. It's pretty easy to do. There's no business licensing required. You've got a lot of control over your brand value. But generally, of the four, it would be likely to be the least effective. Not least reasons would be, how would these hundreds of millions of Chinese consumers find your website, would be one challenge. If they did order, it's going to take quite a while for you to get it from here to wherever they are. There's obviously the cost of the transportation and the import duties and fees, and then of course in customer support and sales and support, and if you're in the environment where there's returns involved, then it would become extremely complex and costly. But it is an option, and it may be somewhere to start. The second one is operating, selling to the Chinese consumers via a self-owned website within China. So you, as your company, you set up a local business in China, and from there you establish a local Chinese website under the auspices of your local business. You have to register a local company in order to do that. It obviously overcomes some of the delivery and customer support issues, but again, you would be one of many, many thousands of websites within China. So your digital marketing, search engine optimization are going to be a continual part of working through in order to drive traffic to your site. The third option is to sell through one of these third-party B2C platforms. And I showed in the pie chart earlier the dominant players are JD Worldwide and Tmall Global. So both the market leaders, Alibaba's Tmall and JD, have set up business units to target specifically overseas clients, for example British companies that want to sell to the Chinese consumers under the brand JD Worldwide and for Alibaba's Tmall Global. So they already have a large catchment of Chinese consumers visiting Tmall on a regular basis and visiting JD.com on a regular basis. So this avoids some of the regulatory hassle. Up until the recent development, it did need a presence in China, but now we have these new worldwide and global platforms. That means you can sell through these platforms, coupled with the recent cross-border regulatory changes, without actually having to set up and establish a business in China. So both these service providers will offer you space in their digital hypermarket, I guess, and they will charge you ongoing monthly fees and also take a commission on the sales that happen through there. That model effectively is coupled together with the fourth model, which is to sell through these cross-border pilot platforms. The government has identified selected cities, you can see the blue dots on the map here, that have preferential policies for cross-border e-commerce transactions. And what that means is that cross-border orders, so Chinese consumers that have ordered, for example, British product, when that product is being imported into China, it can either be through a direct shipping model, so the order is shipped from the UK and then imported in through one of these select cities, the pilot platforms, or it could be that the product is held in one of these cities in a bonded warehouse type environment. So there are sort of fast-track clearances and cost-efficient options by having the product already in China but in a bonded warehouse. And the tax environment around this is gradually unfolding with developments that make it more attractive to take advantage of these cross-border bonded warehouse solutions. So there are four models, that's just probing them at a very high level, four models of how to potentially capitalize on these Chinese online consumers. Whichever model you choose, and indeed as with any omni-channel supply chain, the last mile delivery is going to be the moment of truth as to whether the customers, the consumers are going to be happy or not. It's not without its challenges in China, but many of these large companies have developed very effective last mile delivery solutions. Coming back to JD.com with their 3.8 million orders per day, 85% of those orders are delivered either next day or same day, 85%, which is more than 3 million orders a day, through their own network. We'll get more into that into the second webinar when we look at the whole logistics and supply chain implications. One of the things I think about this cross-border to note is that some recent developments involving UK businesses who are taking advantage of these routes to market. So going back to the Tmall Global option for a second, the Royal Mail in 2015 set up a storefront on Tmall Global to provide a channel through the Royal Mail storefront, through the Alibaba Tmall Global storefront, for British companies to sell to Chinese consumers online. The latest, I guess, big name to join up in that ecosystem is Waitrose, who from April of this year started offering a relatively limited range of products through the Royal Mail storefront, through the Alibaba Tmall Global to Chinese consumers. The second development is very recent. Just last week in London, JD.com had a launch event to announce the formation of their British mall within the JD Worldwide infrastructure. So this will be a section specifically for British products. So we have a channel there focused at the moment. The biggest cross-border channels or cross-border economies generally for the Chinese consumer involve the United States, France, Japan, Australia and Germany are probably the largest channels that Chinese consumers buy from overseas, and the UK is rising up that. So JD Worldwide have launched a specific British mall. They launched that just last week. Its flagship customers include Liverpool Football Club and Cow and Gate, an unlikely duo, I think. So to sort of bring it to a conclusion where we can open it up for discussion, the online consumers are extremely savvy. They have access, like any online consumer, to all the information and all the social media chatter that all the other online consumers have. It's just that there are a lot more of them, and it has a lot to grow. So through the journey of internet retail, it's a similar cycle in that we have to have an online presence where people can find us. We have to have the reputation and references, particularly in the WeChat social media environment, for them to validate. They need to be able to order and pay through the channels that they are used to. We have to address the delivery, and we have to be able to address the return. So even though there's 500 million Chinese citizens that are not yet on the internet, there are 500 million that are already on the internet, and the social media chatter can make or break how you succeed in that market. For people that are interested in exploring this further, in partnership with the UKWA, we are hosting a specifically focused e-commerce and logistics mission in the middle of October to Shenzhen and Hong Kong. You can see a brief synopsis of it here together with the website address, ChinaMission.uk. It involves a UK pavilion at the Shenzhen Exhibition Centre, where there will be 2 trade shows running simultaneously, one focused on internet and e-commerce and the other focused on logistics. And of course those 2 worlds are now inextricably linked. We will have market briefing, exhibitor participants. I'll have privileged access to research papers, some of which I've quoted from in my presentation today. We have a mechanism for you to schedule business matching meetings with other exhibitors and participants at the trade show, and there's a lot of companies exhibiting, participating there that for you may be potential customers, there may be potential suppliers, there may be potential business partners, joint venture partners, and there may be potential multipliers in terms of your business capitalizing on these opportunities. There'll also be a program of site visits, both in Shenzhen and in Hong Kong, where we'll be looking specifically at e-commerce, logistics operations, and cross-border facilities, and then we'll have a range of networking functions for you to participate in as well. So that concludes my presentation, and we can open it up for questions, and I'm not sure how the questions come in.
Mark, it's Peter stepping in here. I'm taking a few questions down here that have been coming in while you've been presenting. First of all, thanks very much again for that enlightening presentation. The numbers never cease to amaze. It really is quite incredible. I'm just looking at the time. I guess we've probably got about 10 minutes or so. So I'm just going to try and consolidate a few questions here and fire them back to you, Mark. One or two sort of asking the same thing. First one was just in terms of the overall number, what sort of percentage does Singles Day make of the whole kind of program?
Of the total e-commerce?
Yeah.
It would be a relatively small number if it's $15 billion on one day out of the total. I think the total is over 600 billion. So I mean, it's a massive spike, and there's a lot of. One of the interesting things is that the brands and the merchants that participate in that are under enormous pressure to do very steep discounting that's available for just those 24-hour periods. So that's one of the ways they drive it. Say $15 billion out of 600, so whatever that is.
And sort of related to that, there were a couple of questions about, and I think the numbers were in the presentation. Perhaps the thing here is when we circulate the slides afterwards, there's an awful lot in that presentation to digest, and you can work some of these things out just going back and doing the maths as we were just trying to do then. But a couple of questions actually. What's the average order value? And I think you had some stats. I can't remember which slide, but there were some stats in there in terms of number of orders, particularly in the JD.com and so on. But I mean, roughly any idea just in terms of average order value? Yeah,
I haven't got a currency converter on me, but at last week's JD.com launch, they said that their average order value is 378 renminbi. So whatever the exchange rate is for that, so that's 378 Chinese yuan, and that was one of the higher basket levels in the market.
Okay. And actually, I think this question came up when you mentioned about the JD.com London launch. One question came in: is this the arrival of JD and Alibaba into the UK market to compete with Amazon in this space in the UK market? Any views on that at all?
Well, certainly the JD.com launch was much more about getting British brands and British retail to sign up for their platform to sell into China. They weren't really looking at trying to get into the UK domestic market per se. They were looking to get UK products to Chinese consumers. Whether they'd, well, that was scheduled some time ago, but whether it was synchronized, whether they expected it to be synchronized with the Brexit outcome, which was like 5 days before that, or not, I don't know, but they did comment that, you know, for British companies, this is maybe an area that, following that referendum outcome, might become of more interest. So from JD.com, I think probably no. I think they're doing very well at home, and they've got plenty to work on there. Alibaba also doing very well at home, plenty to work on there. But I think they have bigger global aspirations of taking on the world in a massive clash with Amazon, and so I would see more likely to see Alibaba spreading its tentacles into the domestic UK market and going head-to-head with Amazon in what could be quite a messy battleground, notwithstanding the impact it has on traditional retail and homegrown platforms. So I think Alibaba is more likely to see a domestic presence in the UK than JD.com.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of our members are expressing concerns about Amazon in terms of, clearly the debate wrangles on, are Amazon a retailer or a logistics provider? And as you said earlier, these things are becoming increasingly more linked. Amazon in the UK now, opinion is divided. I think they are, for some of our members, a potential threat to their operation, and for others who have facilities in the right locations are an opportunity. So I guess the answer is just be mindful that you know, the Alibabas and the JD.coms are out there and maybe making their presence felt. I think the other thing about Amazon competing in the market is, they took, I think, 10% of all new build stock in the UK last year, and of course where they're taking that amount of warehousing new build stock, they're also taking a good percentage of available labour in the market as well. So it's not so much the fear of competing with them, but it's some of the other indirect competitive factors that these big players put into the market. So we do need to sort of keep our eye on this one. Certainly from a trade association point of view, we do that. Another question was, in terms of opportunity, Mark, at the moment, on the cross-border business, which countries are leading that charge into China? Where are the... Yeah,
on the cross-border, the main, it's probably more of a pull than a push. So it's rather generating or the interest from the Chinese consumers to pull the different countries' products in rather than or supplementing the push. So the biggest cross-border channels at the moment are products from the United States, from Japan, from France, from Australia, and from Germany, and from also the UK is there in the top 10, and this relates to the it relates to the Chinese consumers' interest and desire for international brands from a perception of quality perspective, certainly from the cosmetics and food perspective. Then safety is a huge criteria, and there's a perception of quality and safety from international brands. Australia and New Zealand are big just from the aspect of the milk and milk formula, which reflects the previous tragedy due to counterfeit products, and then classic national brands, British brands, American brands, United States brands as well. Well, one interesting aspect about the opportunity for British companies is that of all the British products that are sold online around the world, so if we think British products outbound sales to online consumers around the world, 25% of those products are purchased by Chinese online consumers. So there's already an established respect, desire, and increasingly economic spending power to be able to buy these British products. So a quarter of the British overseas online e-commerce sales are going to China.
Yeah. Two last questions, Mark, just conscious of time. One question was regarding Alipay. The question was, is Alipay open for logistics providers outside China to use for taking payments if they have to provide services into the Chinese market?
That's a very good question, and to be honest, I don't know the answer off the top of my head. But if we know who raised the question,
yeah,
I'll be happy to, or I'll be happy to find out and get back to the group. So I wouldn't like to guess right now.
And there's a number of questions we haven't got round to answering. So I mean, again, fire those into either Mark or UKWA, and we will find the appropriate answers or at least source of information. And final question, Mark, what do people need to do regarding the trade mission? I think we'll take all the cost stuff outside. Just ask anyone that is interested to get in touch with, again, either yourself or UKWA. But is there anything else that anybody needs to know about the trade mission in October?
Yeah, well, it's a fantastic opportunity. I think, well, Peter, you've been to that trade show in a previous life. I think we have a couple of people on the webinar who participated in a smaller version of this in 2014. If the China market is of serious interest for you, this 5-day program is a full-on immersion in terms of the knowledge you will gather, the networks, the contacts that you will make, and the business opportunities that you will uncover. It's a full 5-day program. It takes in site visits, networking, business matching meetings, the UK pavilion at the trade show. The trade shows have forums, we'll have market briefings, etc. So www.chinamission.uk has a wealth of information. Through that, or directly, welcome to contact myself or indeed our major partner, the UKWA.
Thanks, Mark. And just conscious, we're 2 or 3 minutes over, so I'm going to wrap it up there. Just again, on behalf of the participants this morning, the UKWA membership, really thank you very much for giving your time and sharing such a wealth of information with us. And we look to the follow-up seminar on the 26th of July, which we will be publishing details for. So watch out for that, everyone. And again, for everyone that's joined the webinar this afternoon, thanks for attending. I hope you found that useful, and please don't hesitate to contact us for further information. This is Peter Ward at the UKWA signing off, and look forward to being in touch with you again in the near future. Thanks very much and good afternoon.